Hey, thank you guys. Thanks for your attention. And I get, when people find out that I'm a former Homeland Security advisor to the president, I often get the question as, knowing what you know, how do you sleep at night? And my standard response is like a baby. I wake up every 2 hours, I cry, and then I go back to sleep. I'm just kidding. We're in better hands than that. But I'd like to thank, first of all, Dr. John, wherever he is, and his team. I've been a patient of Dr. John's for a couple of years, and he's become a very good friend. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to come out and be able to spend some time with you guys. The challenge is, for anybody that's ever spoken in a venue, when you're the last or one of the last speakers in a very august and well-informed group of people, it makes you feel a little bit like Elizabeth Taylor's 8th husband on their honeymoon night. I'm really not sure I can tell you anything new, but I'll try to make it interesting, right? So anyway, I think I got to operate this thing. So I'm going to tell you what I would characterize as an executive burnout in my life. And let me see if I can. I was a reasonably fit guy in my 30s. I lifted weights, did a lot of long distance running. I was on the standard American diet. And so that didn't really have great effect on me for a long time. And I got married at the age of 32. And then I started having kids. And then I continued to get these progressively more responsible positions in high levels of government. And I, no kidding, worked 12 to 18 hours a day, 6-7 days a week for a lot of years of my life. And with the responsibility of being a husband and a father and the responsibility at work, I put myself last in prioritization of how I took care of myself. And so I got away with that for a while. And so I'm a ship captain by trade, so I spent 12 years of my life at sea. And so that's kind of how I got on this road. And so this is a picture of me 5 years ago. I was 45 pounds heavier. And this is my last day leaving the White House. I had my family, and we got our picture taken with the president in the Oval Office. But, as you unpack my history's a little unique, but it's not. I had 2 right inguinal hernias, 1 right femoral hernia. I'll characterize it generally as metabolic dysfunction, toxicity, which Dr. John diagnosed, degenerative labrum and low back, which is what brought me to him. And I just started, I'm miserable. What am I going to do about this? I just didn't know where to turn. And I kept going to standard medical practitioners. And so I ended up with a limp. And I limped for like 18 months. I couldn't get rid of it. And so I'm listening to Ben Azadi interview John on a podcast one day, and I'm like, I got to meet this guy, right? So I reached out to him, and how many times have I been now? 6-7 times, I think. And as I said, we've become dear friends since that. But it was interesting. I was stationed in Key West at the time. And anybody that's been down to Key West, they've got these IV clinics they call hangover clinics that you can get good bona fide IV drips. And so I just started going in for a regular Myers cocktail or vitamin C or something like that. And so he had seen me for the degeneration in my hip, and I had this pain. And I got a vitamin C drip, and I texted him, and I said, yeah, my pain feels like it went away. And he calls me back and he goes, hey, brother, that's not because you had a degenerative labrum, it's because you got toxins in there. And so when I came back through the next time, he ran toxicity tests on me, black mold, Lyme, and heavy metal, mercury were the big ones. And so I learned about fasting and the fasted lifestyle. And I over-fasted at first, and so I think a lot of us probably make that mistake. Where you're not feasting properly on the right macros. And so I removed seed oils, and Dr. Kate Shanahan is one of the big seed oil voices, and I listened to her on a podcast, and then I read her book. And at this point, I'm like reading every book I can get my mitts on. And so Kate lays out all these different seed oils that you should get rid of. I elected to use the ketogenic approach because that seemed to make the most sense for me. And then really focused on clean eating. And I got to tell you, for those of you who are married or have a significant other, this is really hard to do if your significant other's not all in, right? And so my wife, Kate's been fantastic in that regard. I read this book by Dr. Tom Levy, if you've ever heard of this guy. He's a cardiologist who worked with Dr. Hal Huggins, who's one of the pioneering dentists in biological dentistry. And so with this, I grew up, you got the book. It's a great read. I had 7 amalgam fillings because I was a child of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and that's what they did. So I had 7 mercury fillings in my head. And then I had a root canal procedure. And think about this. The root canal is like the only procedure in all of medicine where the doctor goes in and kills the tissue and then leaves it in, right? And so all of these things take time to remediate. And so find a good biological dentist, and I've been able to do that. Supplementation is still a great mystery to me. I've kind of dialed in what I think the right supplementation is for my life. I'm constantly making adjustments and questioning what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. I think there are several core supplements that are important. But I started measuring stuff on top of the clean eating and fasting and just learned about biohacking. And I think the first biohacker I became aware of was Dave Asprey. And then that began to cascade into all these other influencers that are out there, including our guest today, Ben Greenfield. But Oura Ring. So anybody have sleep apnea? Just curious. All right, we got one. So I have sleep apnea. I had an app. It was on a 100-point scale. I was getting like 95 to 100 every night because I was wearing my CPAP properly. Then I got my Oura Ring, and I discovered that my deep sleep was in the single-digit minutes every single night. And I'm like, I should be getting a lot more deep sleep than this. And so I ended up experimenting with that and no longer use my CPAP as a result. But there are all these little things that have like systemic implications for what we do and how we're allowed to heal our body. Keto Mojo, which is easy, measuring ketones and glucose, lumen. And that lumen on a 5-point scale tells you whether or not you're burning fat, burning carbs, and then recommends macros for the day. Levels, I wear a continuous blood glucose monitor. I watch what I eat and I see when everything spikes so that I can kind of dial that in. The Air device, probably not many people have heard of that, a couple. So Dr. Bill Davis wrote a book called The Super Gut, fantastic yogurt recipe in the Super Gut. But the Air device actually measures hydrogen gas in your breath, which tells you whether or not you have SIBO, and so small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And so your hydrogen level post-eating tells you whether or not you're affected by SIBO and this stuff. Hydrogen water, ozone, and this is one of the things that Dr. John turned me on to as part of my treatment for toxicity. But I just bought an ozone device for home use, and I use it in all the different ways, principally in water, rectal insufflation, ear insufflation. Regular blood donation. Guys in particular, if you don't do this, you need to. You got a lot of blood in your, a lot of iron in your system. Women, if you're menstruating, you've got a natural cycle that takes care of some of that, but guys don't have that. And so I'm trying to think. The Copper Cure was the name of the book by a guy named Morley Robbins. And he talks about measuring iron in your blood system. And when you get an iron test from part of your blood panel, it's almost always a serum ferritin test, which is the iron in your blood. But most of the iron in your body, 95% of it's not in your blood, it's in your tissues. And so being aware of those sorts of things is important. Hot to cold shower cycling. I haven't gotten to the point in my journey of I'm building my own spa. I will at some point have a cold plunge, but I don't yet have one. And so I live out in the country on the water, and we've got really cold well water. And so I'll get a nice hot shower when I get one, and then I'll stand for 2 minutes under a freezing cold shower. Red lights, infrared sauna. We've talked about a lot of these things today. High dose melatonin, which is the pro tip I got from Dr. John. High dose amino acids, I've heard from a lot of people. There's amino acid deficiency in almost all of us. And so when you're trying to rebuild and regenerate, and I don't think you can overdose on these things. I think you just supplement with those. The nice thing about amino acids as a subset of protein, as I understand the science, is they're already digested. So when they hit your stomach, they're out working for you already. You don't have to go through the digestion process. Methylene blue, and every time I've come to visit Dr. John, I get the methylene blue IV. I've gotten the suppositories. I've gotten also a liquid form. And I think you warned us, John, earlier to make sure that you're getting a high quality pharmaceutical grade methylene blue, because there's a lot of stuff out there in the market, and some of the methylene blue out there's got industrial junk in it. I found this thing called a Carol bike. I ride that rascal 4 or 5 times a week. The cool thing about it is it's REHIT, if you've ever heard of that term, reduced exertion, high intensity interval training. And so in 8 minutes and 20 seconds, I get a workout. And you go nice and slow, 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 slow. And then you just go 100% for 20 seconds. And then you go slow, and then 100% for 20 seconds. And I find this useful. And then blood flow restriction bands is just a good way when you're lifting weights to be able to concentrate all that. Certainly not an exhaustive list. This is my list, and I'm still learning and growing. Continuing journey. So this picture, I'm gonna scroll back. This picture was taken almost 3 years ago. And if you look, because most of my fat gets up into my neck, right? I was 205 pounds in this picture. And I'm 162 pounds in this picture. And I got to 162, and I thought, we've all been challenged with diets before. I got to 162, and I've been here for 2.5 years, almost 3 years. And so I just thought it was impossible to get there. And not only was I able to get there, I was able to sustain it. And so I still come to visit John quarterly. Supplementation, I really wish there was an easy button for this. I have looked at the DNA company. I've looked at Wild Health, which are a couple of companies that look at all these different markers and then prescribe stuff that you need. I read Bill Davis's gut restoration protocol. And we make yogurt at home. It's super yummy. And the big difference is when you buy yogurt in the grocery store, it's been fermented for 4 to 6 hours because it's a commercial product line, and they got to crank out the yogurt. And you might only have, 10 million good microbial bacteria in a yogurt. But if you get a yogurt machine and you cook it for 36 hours at a certain temperature, you're going to have hundreds of billions of good bacteria, and so restoring all those things is important. I've read well over 50 books to date. I'm following 10 podcasts, which is probably too many. And I'm just experimenting all the time, right? And so the cool thing this summer, I retired from the Coast Guard back in July, and my wife and I moved back up to the Eastern Shore of Maryland on Chesapeake Bay. And I joined a soccer men's league. Now, mind you, 3 years ago, I was limping. I couldn't have done this, right? And I get these 30-somethings out there from Central America and Jamaica and all these other places where, soccer's part of the thing. And at 58, I'm able to hang with all these boys and school them from time to time. But I just decided about 2 years ago that I was going to be more fit at 60 than I was at 30 because I'm cracking the code with the help of a lot of the influencers that I've mentioned. All right, so this is the dangerous slide because I'm going to call out a couple of the books that were kind of probably among the top books that I read that really gave me something to work with. And I have two obsequious shout outs, one to my brother, Dr. John, and to our other guest, Ben Greenfield. But Ben Bickman wrote a book called Why We Get Sick, molecular biologist. He's an academic PhD. Fantastic book about trying to understand your biology and what makes you sick. Jason Fung is a medical doctor. He's written a bunch of books. The Obesity Code is one of them. And you don't have to be fat to read the Obesity Code and derive some benefit from the principles of biology and what this means. So he treats people off type 2 diabetes and brings them back into normal order using a protocol that's pretty straightforward. The book Into the Light is written by a PhD named William Campbell Davis. And I think this book's almost 30 years old. But he talks about a lot of the stuff with photobiomodulation and things that we were talking about earlier today. Really good book. Breath by Nestor. So there's a lot of good books. Patrick McKeon is also a really good author on breathing. This guy's an investigative journalist, and he just kind of dove in from an investigative journalist's perspective. I found that it was not only really well written, it was just easy to track with throughout. Boundless, I don't know if you've seen the book Boundless by Ben Greenfield, but things like the Encyclopedia Britannica, right? I mean, it's a honking book, probably 650 pages. And then John Lawrence's book Melatonin, and that's where I got the sense of superdosing on melatonin was a good thing. The Kaufman Protocol, or Kaufman, I think is how she pronounced it. She's a medical doctor named Sandra Kaufman. And she's a big avid rock climber, active lady. And she started out as a cellular biologist, master's degree in cellular biology. She switched over to medicine, got an MD. And then somewhere in her 40s, she just got pissed off that her body wasn't keeping up with the rock climbing and other things that she wanted to do. So she made it her kind of practice to just really examine the cellular pathways and the processes in your body that deteriorate your ability to have longevity. And so first half of this book is biology. Second half of this book is, I think there are like 15 elements she recommends you supplement with and explains why. She wrote a follow-on book. I haven't read it yet. But she organizes the book differently in that she organizes on different organs. So if you're having trouble with a particular organ, you can dial it in. Hidden Epidemic, I think somebody back there lifted up the book earlier. Tom Levy's written a number of books, but his general thesis in this is 98+% of all heart disease comes from your mouth. I don't know if any of your pet owners, but you know, when you take your pet to the veterinarian, what's the first thing the vet usually does with your dog? Lifts your gums up and examines the teeth and the gums. It's the same principle. And so there's a lot of stuff in your mouth. If you've got root canal, if you've got periodontitis, if you've got mercury amalgam fillings, the ADA still says all this stuff's kosher, because they'll end up with a class action lawsuit on their hands if they ever change their position, I think. But there's some things that we can clean up at our mouths. Undoctored was written by the same Dr. Bill Davis. Fantastic book. And it really is, you need to own your own doctoring and get smart enough so that you know the right questions to ask, unless you're fortunate enough to have somebody that's really the full palate naturopath. Bursting with Energy and the Ozone Miracle, both written by Dr. Frank Schallenberger. I'm sure many of you have heard of Dr. Schallenberger. Bursting with Energy, fantastic book. And one of the things that he developed over time is, what's it called? It's a bioenergy test. And so you can actually find somebody that follows his protocol and find somebody that does the bioenergy test. And I think the doctor around here that does it is Dr. Minkoff up in Clearwater. But there are a handful of them around the country. And then the Ozone Miracle. If ozone's not part of your protocol, It needs to be. You need to figure out how to get an ozone generator and figure out how to use that thing appropriately. And all I would tell you is that the healing journey continues. And so this is my bromance, right? So this is probably 2 years ago, or just about, you know, but we were wrapping up a session for the day, and I was always feeling good about that. But I'm grateful to you, John. I wanted to say that publicly. I really am. But if you guys have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them, or we can deal with them in the panel in the Q&A. But that, my friends, is my journey. And I feel like I've taken... I feel like I've only taken about 5 steps in what will probably be tens of thousands of steps in my journey. So, yeah, I'm working on it. So thank you for that. Anybody?